Mr. Vogel, the leaders of the EU decided to open accession talks with Bosnia and Herzegovina, but any further steps depend on further reform. What do you make of the EU making this step without Bosnia having fulfilled the famous 14 key priorities?
Well, it's a bit of a problematic precedent, obviously. I wouldn't overstate the importance of this step. This is essentially a political declaration by the leaders of the EU member states that they want to see Bosnia-Herzegovina one day join their club. It is not more, but it's also not less than that. However, the fact that this was granted after it was repeatedly stressed that the 14 priorities that were enumerated in 2019 had to be met without Bosnia-Herzegovina actually meeting them is of course troubling, because it suggests that conditions, if you hold out long enough on conditions, they will just be dropped. We have of course seen this before in Bosnia. We probably will see it again, but the important thing now is really to be serious about the 14 priorities and try to address them.
We've heard the European Commission President von der Leyen saying that more was achieved in the last year than in the past decade. What is your take on this assessment, and how much would you say that the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine affected the enlargement process in general?
That's typically hype, typical hype from the European Commission. I mean, there's various ways in which you can measure progress, but, the adoption of two laws that are frankly not terribly, crucial is hardly major progress. The country today is in worse state than it was 10 years ago, than it was 15 years ago. Politics have become more polarized. The oligarchy on all sides, partitocracy has become more entrenched. So I just fail to see where this supposed progress is. You're absolutely right that this is ultimately a geopolitical move. For some reason, the European Commission doesn't want to quite frame it like that. It does not want to say, because of geopolitics, we will not be too harsh on conditions, but that's exactly what it is. So there is a feeling that Bosnia-Herzegovina should be anchored in the EU, that this would help the entire region of the Western Balkans, stabilize the region. And the idea is that this can be done without doing any of the heavy lifting that a real stabilization would take, because that would involve having to confront Serbia with its irredentist policies and its obstructionism vis-a-vis its neighbors, which is not something that the EU wants to do. So this is a way for the EU to signal we want stability because of Ukraine, because of Russia, Russian influence, but we are not willing to do the hard work that real stability and real progress would actually require.
The European Council also called for a quick adoption of the negotiating framework for Ukraine and Moldova, but without a specific date. What do you make of the call from certain European countries to tie the Western Balkans countries' EU path to those of Ukraine and Moldova?
I mean, de facto, politically speaking, they are now linked already. But that does, of course, not mean, nor should it mean, that they will progress at the same pace. If you look at Ukraine and Moldova, these are countries who, under extremely difficult circumstances, including an existential war of defense in Ukraine's case, have made enormous progress in a very short time. I don't think anyone is seriously doubting that the political leadership of both countries is serious about joining the European Union one day. I don't think any of this is true for Bosnia-Herzegovina. I mean, I can think of a few leading politicians who will not want to join. So, you cannot simply say, well, they should now advance at the same pace, not least because the entire process, of course, has to do with meeting benchmarks, meeting conditions, with actual progress. That's a little harder to fake than the sort of fudging of conditions that we've seen in the run-up to yesterday's decision. The other point I would like to make, of course, is that the call by the European Council to start really the negotiating process, to adopt a negotiating framework for Moldova and Ukraine, is a reflection of their worry that if this drags on beyond June, when Hungary will take over the presidency of the Council of the European Union, that the two countries will be slowed down, because the rotating presidency has authority over the intergovernmental conference, the speed of adopting various documents. And there's a general feeling that Hungary will do its best to slow that down. In the case of Bosnia, it will probably try to speed it up.
As you mentioned, Hungary is taking over the presidency, but we also have European elections coming up this summer. How do you feel this will impact the European path of the Western Balkans? We've seen a couple of examples in the region, like North Macedonia, that the process can take a very long time.
Yes, absolutely. I would not overstate the importance of the European elections for the enlargement process as such, because the things that typically slow down the accession process are bilateral issues. In the case of Albania, that's Greece. In the case of North Macedonia, it used to be Greece, now it is Bulgaria. And let's not forget various other governments are hiding behind that. For example, France, where enlargement is not popular at all. But the European Parliament has never been a brake on the process. What I do fear, however, is that we'll see a shift to the right, to the far right, and that will create a climate where enlargement might become quite politically complicated. But at the end of the day, what really counts are the governments that are in the European Council, much more than the MEPs in the European Parliament.
You spoke earlier about the politicians in Bosnia saying that some of them do not want EU integration. When it comes to the ruling coalition in the country, a third of it is comprised by the SNSD party, whose pro-Russian leader and the Republika Srpska entity president Milorad Dodik is known for his secessionist rhetoric and his close ties to the Kremlin. How would you say that can impact the EU path of Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Well, I think Dodik will play along for as long as it serves his purpose. His rhetoric has been all over the place, you know. Sometimes it sounds like he's quite pro-European, and most of the time it sounds like he's blaming the EU for everything. But the point is that with the current setup, we have forces in the ruling coalition, state-level coalition, that clearly at the end of the day have no interest in joining, because it would undermine their business model. It will make it impossible to continue ruling through fear and through patronage the way that they're doing it now. And so I think longer term, medium term, over the next several years, I think these issues will become more acute as Bosnia advances, if slowly, on its succession process. At the same time, the HDZ, of course, their main interest is to further cement the sort of ethnic politics enshrined in the constitutional setup, create a de facto third entity. They will have no problem torpedoing the process and torpedoing any progress if they feel that this is in their interest. In other words, to essentially blackmail the other forces into giving in.
Mr. Vogel, thank you for speaking to Radio Free Europe.
Pleasure.